evening, wherever you are. I'm Cecilia Maundu. I'm a digital security trainer. I'm a broadcast journalist. I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism. And today we are discussing a very interesting topic. But first, allow me to give this opportunity to my guest, who is my very, very good friend. Very good friend. Yes, hello. Welcome to Digital Data Podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
Me too. Thank you so much for having Harlo Holmes, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Digital Security for an organization called Freedom of the Press Foundation. We're US based. However, we do work all over the globe, as I'm sure you know, because we've done a lot of stuff together. And this is a very important topic to me as well. Something that definitely deserves more research in the digital security training space.
So, you being a woman in such a high level position, tell us a little bit about your experience because we are here to show that this field is for everyone. You know, we are trying to move away from the concept that things to do with cyber security are a male thing. So, tell us a little bit about your experience, especially working for such a big organization. Yes.
Sure. I definitely will. Well, first and foremost, I would say that I'm lucky in that Freedom of the Press Foundation is relatively small for the impact that we have. We started out in 2012. When I started, there were 5 people. Not only was I the only woman, but I was also the only Black person or non-white person of any kind. So it was 1 brown lady and 4 other white men. And we definitely got to grow to the point that we are because my coworkers, my colleagues at the time, given that we were so small, gave me the opportunity to build a program that I wanted to see happen in the world. I had come to digital security training from security engineering. So before this, I worked at a group called the Guardian Project, which is a Android focused, although they do iOS as well, mobile security shop where they build a lot of really excellent circumvention tools, such as Orbot, which is the version of the Tor browser that is for an Android device, a number of media tools, such as RSS readers that help deliver the news to people in places where news might be censored, a lot of really amazing projects. And that said, when I was working there, I loved it so much, but I definitely noticed that what was missing, and this is very important for digital security training, was this building of a bridge between the people who are ultimately going to be using these tools, often journalists, human rights defenders, people working in all sorts of really, really elevated and often scary scenarios, and the fundamentals that they didn't necessarily have the opportunity to use. So when I was at the Guardian Project, we would build all of these excellent tools. Then when we put them in people's hands, especially if they were going out to, take photographic or video evidence of atrocities, for instance, having the tool in their hand wasn't enough. And I would always just kind of worry about how prepared they were, even if they had the best tech in their hands. And so I decided to switch from, writing code and caring as much as I do about cryptography and security and engineering, and focus more on building that bridge to prepare people for when they do need the tools that other people are building way better than me.
And Harlo, this is something that came up one time. I don't know. I think it's RISCON. Somebody said you can have an amazing tool, but if people are not using the tool, then what's the use of the tool?
Exactly.
So yes. Yeah, so today we want to discuss a conversation we started in Dar es Salaam when we were doing... No, actually we started in Costa Rica.
In Costa Rica, yes.
When we were talking about digital nihilism. So first, demystify what is digital security nihilism so that our audience would understand what we are exactly talking about.
Sure. So this is, I think, a term that we've coined together. So this is ours. Mine and Cecilia's. This is ours. But it is builds upon the notion of nihilism or nihilism, however you want to pronounce it, which is this existential feeling that you are powerless, and that nothing that you do actually does matter. So when you think about that sense of powerlessness and frustration and feeling of absolute, you know, despair in even knowing about the best tools, people tend not to use them or try really hard to use them, but then find frustration in, still reaching a really, really horrible outcome because of the lessons that have been learned. And this is a very culturally specific rationale that we're trying to unpack. When one of the things that drives us, I think, is seeing that in various different ways when we are doing digital security trainings and appreciating how culturally specific it is. So the type of feeling of powerlessness regarding best practices in digital security will manifest itself differently in the United States, where I'm from, than it would in Kenya, than it would in Caribbean communities, Latin American communities, in Eastern and Central European communities, in Asian communities. All of these things are totally different in terms of like how they manifest themselves on a day-to-day level and how people feel that nihilism and internalize it. But one of the things that definitely does thread all of these experiences together is the fact that all of these people are coming from positions of powerlessness due to a lot of, bad experiences with authoritarianism
Yes.
and the ways that governments, law enforcement, the law, the legal system happen to treat people who do this type of work. And that's the common thread that we're trying to make people aware of and look at the different cultural differences and show that there are different tactics, different messaging and different tools that can help people get over that nihilism.
So you talked about authoritarian regimes contributing to this issue most of the time. Also have done numerous trainings, and one of the things that I get in some of the trainings, if they want me, they will definitely get me. Yes. If they're looking for me, they will definitely get him. So how are some of the ways that us as digital security trainers can go about combating this hopelessness, this lack of hope in what we are talking about?
Yes. And so that refrain that we hear, if they want me, they will get me. There is a lot of truth to that. There definitely is a lot of truth to that. But that said, there's no reason why people should not still do everything within their power in order to, use the best digital security practices. And the reason why is, well, twofold. One, it makes things a lot harder for someone to get you rather than, just being taken out of the game, so to speak, because of mistakes that you could have easily rectified and things that you knew you should have done, but you didn't do. And so this harkens back to threat modeling. Which is something that we use very, very often as a rubric in digital security training. Threat modeling is a practice of assessing where someone is and looking at the likelihood that a particular type of, adversary or enemy is going to take advantage of them based off of, the things that they haven't done yet or they're not willing
what
to
they've
do.
exposed themselves to.
Yes, exactly, that they expose themselves to. And so when we teach threat modeling, we like to say that it's always a matter of, calculus. How much time does an adversary have? How much money does that adversary have? And how much skill does that adversary have to use in combination if they're sufficiently motivated to go after you, to go after someone? And if you properly apply threat modeling, What you can actually do is establish like how likely it is that a particular adversary is going to actually make my job harder, make my life miserable, come get me, as it were. Because when you appropriately threat model, you can definitely say, like, so some of these adversaries that I know are out there, they're no longer part of my threat model. I don't have to worry about them because I already did what it takes in order to make it that much harder for a real adversary. And I think that that's one way that we want to help people combat their nihilism, rather than thinking of it as an all or nothing game. They're going to get me no matter what. Instead, think about who is it who can get you. Are you going to do the work in order to protect yourself so you can take like those small adversaries and never have to think about them again? Never let it confuse you, never let it make you feel that things are hopeless, and then understand that if there is something that will get you, these are the tools that you have to confront it. And this is the likelihood that that would happen. And that just makes your headspace so much clearer. And that in and of itself should combat that nihilism, right? The second thing is about the duty of care to others. And this is something that I think we learned a lot about in talking to people in Costa Rica, which was a humongous international gathering, and in talking to people in Dar es Salaam. Once again, really, really huge number of folks from around the region. One thing that resonates is thinking less selfishly, or not selfish, but thinking less about the self and that protection, but also rather prioritizing the protection that you can provide to others.
Yes, because you're only as safe as the next person to you. Example I like to give, and it's an example that I had. Is it not Freedom of the Press Foundation? There's this freedom. It's based in Netherlands, and the trainer was talking about the late journalist Khashoggi, how they were able to find him. It is through his friend, because of the communication that they had. So you're only safe. So it's not even about you as a person. It's also about protecting, because it's an ecosystem that if one person is not safe, then that is an avenue, a vulnerability that we have left open. So what do you think are some of the impacts of this nihilism on the issue of cyber hygiene, especially for us journalists? And now we know that our audience are online now, like our lives have moved online. We are now on the digital journalism and all that.
Yes. So the impacts are, I've recognized two trends. And actually two of my really amazing teammates, Dr. Martin Shelton and Anastasia Kolobrova, did amazing work, and they're only going to go further in actually finding confirmation of something that we already kind of intuited, which is that a lot of current digital security training tends to tell people things that they already know they should be doing, but they're not really motivated to do it because it slows them down. Ultimately, journalists, we know how journalists move, how they work, the pace at which they work. It's very, very fast paced. And so anything that puts extra steps in their way in order to chase after that story, in order to talk to that source, et cetera, is going to be met with a lot of resistance. So that is definitely an issue of messaging, I think, from within the digital security training community. We now know that it's undeniable that digital security training as it is, which is that boring thing that's like, you have to use a password manager and here's two-factor authentication. And I mean, all of that is not really landing because people have heard it for almost a decade over and over and over again.
Even
but
more.
but are they doing it? No. Does it work? Yes. Does it, within a threat model, take out the most basic of adversaries? Absolutely. Does it help you ultimately clear that headspace so you can focus on real adversaries? Yes. Are people doing it? No. And so now we have to look inward to think about how we are messaging this in order to move people forward.
So now that conversation brings me to my next question. How should we as digital security trainer approach this thing? Because sometimes you go into a room and when you hear like, oh, I don't think that I can be 100% secure, which is true. No one can ever be 100% secure. Even this
Absolutely not.
building, someone can break in. But how do we handle that? Because already when you read their body language, it's like, oh, I'm here because I have to be here. But what you're teaching me is not like as safe as I would want it to. How do we go about that? Because as a person, I would also get very discouraged because now they already have this attitude they have. How do I go about it?
Do you mean as a trainer you
Yes,
get
as a trainer. Yes,
discouraged?
now I'm coming from
Yes.
a point of a trainer.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That I know exactly how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely takes a lot of work and a lot of extra skills beyond the digital that not every single trainer is going to have. Being able to read a room and understand your position of authority with that you can exude within the identity that you have is really, really important. For example, I have walked into, rooms in the body that I'm in, and I know that I have all the right answers. I know this. However, if my training style doesn't take into account that perhaps this is, culturally a place where people are going to be less talkative. So I know that they would respond more to something that is a little bit more, teacher like. And you should do this. This is how you do this, rather than, hey, how does it make you feel when you are in this situation? Raise your hand and feel free to unmute yourself or whatever. Understanding that there are certain dynamics, often which are incredibly cultural, in order to, very, very quickly change the way that you are going to deliver the same messaging. Because remember, you have the right answer is really, really key. And that takes a lot of like cultural sensitivity, I think, a lot of empathy, and the ability to make decisions about how you are going to, portray the authority that you already have to an audience that needs to make that connection in ways that you might not necessarily know until you get there. That's something that I feel that our team excels really well at. And also, there's a number of different trainers that I've had the pleasure of working with who get that as well. There are some trainers who don't necessarily understand that that's part of the training, and then they just have a slide deck and their speaker's notes, and it's really well put together, and they have the right answers, but they tend to fall flat in terms of like like jumping over that vault of digital security nihilism because they can't make those connections. So that's definitely one thing. Another thing is like we talked about this before, the Mary
Yeah.
Poppins effect, which
Yes.
I think you probably, do you have like a good definition of that?
Well, I'm trying to remember the definition I gave in Dar es Salaam. But before I forget, you're talking about the mode of delivery, and that came out very clear in Dar es Salaam. And also, they brought in the angle of reading who is in the room, first of all. For example, if you're training people with disability, how are you going to be able to relay the information for them to feel like, oh, actually, this is part of, it's called what? This affects me as an individual. And also, I remember one person brought in the issue of confidence because somebody said, you go into a room, and I've experienced this, you find mature men, I don't want to say old men because growing old is a privilege.
It
So,
is.
yes,
It is.
yes.
You have no choice. Real quick aside about getting old, you either do it or they've killed you.
Yeah, yes.
So what are you going to do?
So I'm
Which
going
one
to
would you
use
choose?
mature men, and they look at you and they're like, what could she be telling us,
Yeah.
and already the body language, the mood of the room is different. So those are some of the aspects that I had not looked at very carefully, but they came out very, very strongly. Okay, another thing is technology is fast paced.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you do a follow up training and someone tells you, oh, there's something new in the market. So how do you expect me to keep up? So I also want to know how to handle that because they tell you today you wake up, they say, we started with 8 characters of our password. Now we are at 15. You know, we tell them change after every 3 months. Now we are telling them change them after every 1 month. Somebody's like, oh, I have 5 accounts. I'm not gonna be waste. I have other things I'm doing. So how also do you handle that? Because that's also part of digital security nihilism. Because people now feel powerless. Like, oh, this thing is like as overpowered me. It's like a disease that every day keeps getting bigger, and you're like, oh, you know what? Let it finish me. So also, how do you handle it?
That is a really good way of putting it. Just let it finish me.
Yes, let it finish me, because somebody's like, oh, I can't keep up. And also, hello, I mean, us from this region, the sub-Saharan Africa, don't also forget English is not our first language.
Yes.
So you're introducing terms which most of the time I go into a training and people think you've come to teach them cybersecurity, and they're like, oh, it's digital security, like it's just a subset of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is all the systems and everything, the networks. So also English is not our first language. So you might throw in a term and somebody's like, no, I don't. So also, how do we go about it? Because you have to really bring it down to their level.
Yeah.
I conduct trainings in the rural parts of Kenya, where like English is literally not spoken, and if it is not very, very well, so you also have to know how you are relaying that information in a way that they understand, that they also don't create an attitude in their mind that this is not for me.
That's a lot of really excellent things to unpack. And it definitely goes back to this Mary Poppins effect. So we'll probably like finish on that.
Yes.
But so in terms of working like as primarily an English speaker, a Westerner, a Yankee, Yankee, coming into other cultural contexts and expecting people to, be on the level where I am with like, degrees and in security and accreditation and stuff like that. Like, of course, that's definitely setting both the group that you're training and the trainer themselves up for failure. So you want to avoid that. I'm very sensitive to that. And when there's two ways that I address it that I think are really, really useful. One is understanding the material reality of the place where you are going to train. We are incredibly privileged to walk into a building within, 15 minutes of a training and say like, all right, here's a slide deck. Let's put that on the projector, right? That is definitely not the case when you are working within, like smaller communities, going to like a community center, perhaps in the courtyard of like, like a square or something like that. And you actually do have to take everything that's in your slide deck that you've prepared and be ready to be as incredibly descriptive about terms as possible. Seek metaphor that is appropriate to describe principles before you introduce exactly what the term is called, whether there's a translation in a particular language or not.
Yes.
And also be able to hopefully energize people like with your movement, with if you need to explain exactly how, let's say, HTTP versus HTTPS is different, then be prepared to draw that. Be prepared to position yourself spatially around the space in order to make that clear about, let's say, the different, like the interaction between a computer and a website and a server or a ISP or something like that. So there are ways in order to take the material that because once again, you have the right answer, and do the work in order to translate that. So once again, as like a Yankee, I am very, I love the opportunity, as I'm sure you know, to train with folks all over the globe and understand exactly how the internet works very, very specifically in a particular region and how people negotiate their relationship to information on their own terms, given what is available there. And that's what I get out of it. I am a really, really big fan of co-training. And so when I go into places, especially where I know that there's going to be a language barrier, uh, based off of the fact that I don't speak the language that most people speak or most comfortable with speaking, although they do understand and can speak English very, very like fluently, conversantly, if not fluently, when they come into trainings with me, because that has to be the way that things are set up. But still, if I have the opportunity to say, I also know this amazing trainer in this region, can we both do it? That is the best way, I think, to undertake that. And if that is not possible, one thing that I actually remember doing that was really, really, I think, successful is getting to know someone within, the training beforehand who was really, really interested in the material that we were going to do, and using that person as a translator, not like I'm going to say a sentence, now you translate it or anything like that, but more so being able to call upon that person or like a couple of people in the classroom that you're in front of, and relying upon them to provide that metaphor, to provide those extra answers to questions that people might have that I might not have prepared for. And that's good because you like see in their eyes that like, okay, I'm communicating this enough in English in order for someone who's really enthusiastic about this to really understand it so much that they can translate it to everyone else to bring them all up to that level. And also it just like, it really, really does help you understand for later on what like are the types of metaphors that work within that particular cultural setting that you're in, that you can, share with others, you can bring back later and so on. And that to a certain extent helps you get over that Mary Poppins effect, and also combats digital security nihilism by letting everybody know that, no, this is something that is entirely accessible and applicable to all of us. And this is how.
Thank you. I really agree with you on the part of having a co-trainer, and especially like if you're from different parts of the world, because I always feel like of it's a mixture of different cultures, and you get to learn something. Like I get to learn something from you, you get to learn something from me. Now brings me to my next question.
Yes.
What do you think is the position of localization of resources when it comes to digital security nihilism? Shout out to our friends from Localization Lab, Dragana, Julia, and everyone, the team. So what do you think is the position? Because you said it very well. Like you find like there are some resources which have not been localized. So you actually have to deal with them maybe in English. But what role do you think localization of these resources plays in combating this?
Well, I will start out by saying that a lot of my thinking around that definitely comes from being friends with Julia and Dragana for so long and observing what they do in Localization Lab, and just like the various conversations that we have whenever we can, that really shows me like why they do the work that they do, beyond what people see as far as output of Localization Lab is concerned. So yeah, that methodology, like I totally internalized just from looking at the work that Localization Lab is doing. And I really feel that the work they do is incredibly important regarding, bridging these gaps, making access to knowledge around these technologies more accessible, and also bringing more options to the table that people aren't necessarily aware exist. This is actually a really interesting discussion, which might be like tangential to the digital security nihilism thing. But Localization Lab actually works with a number of tools that people don't even know exist, which might be really, really perfect for what they want to get done. So, for instance, I can't wait to invite you to this. That's another thing that I wanted to do. There is Localization Lab is hosting a AMA, or Ask Me Anything, about this particular app called Tella.
Yeah, we're working with them under the Sustain project.
Exactly.
Yeah. Raphael and Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm actually looking forward to it, because I actually realized the other day that journalists in Kenya were using Teller. I'm actually interviewing one of them because I'm doing an episode with Teller. So yeah.
Sweet. Great. So Tella is a really phenomenal app that helps people document, things that should definitely be documented in a safe and verifiable way. Ultimately, that's pretty much the elevator pitch for Tella. But it's really excellent to know that there are some journalists here using it. However, like across the globe, I would love to see more adoption on that. And there's so many like points or on the planet right now where that is an app that could do so much benefit in preserving what has been going on when traditional ways of, like documentation is being challenged for a variety of reasons. This is an amazing alternative. It's incredibly accessible. And raising awareness about that from a local context, I think, is like the work that we have to do. When you mentioned that a lot of people think that when they come into a training, they're going to have like cybersecurity training,
Yes.
not expecting digital security training and not really knowing what the difference is. I think that emphasis on tooling might bridge that particular gap and make people feel that they're actually getting a lot more out of these trainings rather than, just like the typical stuff. And so more opportunities to do that would be really, really excellent.
So now let's come to the point of organization. Even in our organizations, you find there's a lot of, especially if you work for an organization that is quite big in things of digital safety. You find an organization is very careful on the even putting data out there. Also, if from an organization point of view, you find maybe they're HR people, human resource people, different people who are not in the like in the IT department. Also, how do we combat that with the, or how do we deal with them? Because you find them getting tired. Like, for example, there's a policy on password change, and they're like, oh no, people, we are tired of every day I have to come up with a new password because maybe they've put 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they're like, oh, so how do we also come to that point of dealing with these people that we work for the same organization? They're no longer like strangers, like participants in our training, but they work for this organization and they feel like their IT department is overwhelming them, Yes.
So that is definitely the front office problem. And that means that when you're thinking about, HR, people in finance,
Yes.
people who, do the payroll at an organization, people who think that their jobs are so like adjacent to the work of the organization, like they're keeping the lights on, they're keeping the gears turning.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily feel that they are part of the entire narrative of digital security and safety at their organization. However, we do know that those people are absolutely perfect to, for adversaries to poke at because of this mentality that what I do is not tangential. They don't care about the contents of my email. They care about the contents of my CEO's email. And so that's the person who deserves to have this training, not me. So that is definitely something that you do have to combat and falls well underneath the umbrella of digital security nihilism. Because it's like, who cares about me? I don't care. I don't need to use this. If I even broach the subject, the IT department is going to make my life more difficult, and I don't have the time for this because I have to keep the lights on. I have to keep the gears turning. Leave me alone. And so that is a very, very special way of interfacing with a group of people. And so you can address that in training, and definitely your trainings do have to address that up front. There is framing is so important. Everything is, I would say, 50% framing and 50% training. And you have to address that totally upfront and give them examples of that are accessible and hopefully not petrifying, but just scary enough for them to understand why, they're part of the narrative. They're always going to be part of the narrative.
Because even like in Kenya, the issue of cyber safety, digital safety has always been seen as an IT thing. Like, I'm not there, so it doesn't concern me, know? But now we are getting to a point of we all have to be part of it. I mean, now this is our new normal. So, Harlo, Are there any psychological factors that contribute to individuals or organization adopting a nihilistic view of digital security? Is there something that contributes? Let me give an example.
Sure.
Here, one thing that I know that contributes, we want to imagine I'm not famous. Who would even want to come after my information? You know, like what are some of the factors that maybe you have seen in your trainings around the world, or even now that you work in an organization that deals with different people?
Yeah. So the I'm not important enough, definitely. I don't have anything to hide, so who
Yes,
cares?
who cares? Yes,
Definitely.
yes.
In which case, don't sell yourself short, babe. You are a rock star no matter what. Everyone cares about your stuff. Don't worry.
Yeah.
No. And that is a certain amount of like humility and exhaustion, right? Um, and that's perfectly normal. And I think most people actually, every single one of us, like kind of wakes up in that particular state, no matter what. And that's when I would say that you have to lean upon that narrative of protection of others and sense of community, because you are a humble person if you do earnestly believe that it's not about you. No one cares about me. No one, whatever. That's when you have to think about the community that you belong to. And as a humble person, that usually is something that resonates with people. There's also a lot of trauma and
Yeah, trauma.
trauma. So I guess we can go from, this one example that we have been talking about, which is, the person who works in HR or in payroll or something like that, to the other extreme, which are journalists, perhaps famous journalists who work with sensitive sources, who find out that they have been directly targeted with, malware such as Pegasus and things like that. And that trauma is really, really acute and very, very hard to unpack and help people deal with. This isn't my metaphor. I think I've heard a number of people talk about it in various ways. So, folks at OCCRP, for instance, I've heard speak about this in these terms. At Citizen Lab, I've heard them speak about it in these terms. And it's also something that I love to kind of have in my head when talking about this particular type of trauma, is the way that we look at, digital infection, viruses, malware, things like that, in the same way that we look at medical infection and, and disease and things like that. So if you want to think about, the lowest hanging fruit, the things that you tell people, like if you just do this, this, and this, you can knock out those adversaries and you worry about bigger things. That when you have your account taken over because you've been reusing your password across every single account because you can remember it and you didn't want to use a password manager, and then it turns out that some hacker who's just wanting to get into your bank account, right, or take over your Instagram account in order to spam people with Bitcoin scams or something like that, that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's the easiest adversary to defeat. And if you were going to translate that to the medical metaphor, that's like you got a cold, right? And how do you remedy a cold? You do, like basic things in order to keep yourself safe as you heal. Then, you go through other types of like medical, analogies, such as like, what does it look like to get, malaria? What is it, or how does it feel like, what could you do in order to prevent infection? What do you do for a cure? But then when you're thinking of things like targeted malware for the people who are the most traumatized by Pegasus and the like, that actually reminds me a lot of COVID. It really does.
Okay.
And the reason why is because, well, not only did they come roughly into our imagination at the same time, so like as we were really, really starting to, within the media, talk about Pegasus, that was also during, the beginning of COVID and lockdowns and the trauma that that caused. But aside from that, in addition to being gravely ill and getting sick and possibly dying, there's also a stigma attached to it that weighs on people like existentially, like weighs on people in the way that they think of themselves as a person. So in addition to being ill, and healing from that, you also have to think about the choices you made to get COVID, right? Should I have gone to that restaurant? Did I need to break curfew to go to that party? How does that make me feel? And so when you think about like digital security, it's like, I clicked on that link. Who, like, how dare I even try to write this story in the first place? I knew I was asking for, retaliation, things like that. And then also like stigma about the community at large, which is I had Pegasus. I was literally talking to, sources and other journalists about sensitive issues with my phone right here. And now this government knows exactly what we all were saying. How do I tell them, right, that I have been exposed? How can people ever trust me again? And so this is actually like humongous trauma that I don't have the answers to how we like solve it, but I do feel that like in naming it and giving people once again that metaphor in order to like grapple with, we can do work in order to heal.
So, last but not least, how do we incorporate this? Because the more I speak with you, I'm like, oh, we should have been putting it in like part of our trainings. Because you said it very well. Somebody tells you, I've got nothing to hide. But I was reading somewhere and they say privacy is not about something to hide; it's about something to protect. It's your information. No one should have it.
Yes.
It's the same way with like data has become the new buzzword, and somebody's like, well, I don't know, I don't really care because no one. Yeah. So how do we incorporate it in our training so that we can, because it's an issue, maybe sometimes we don't see it by their body language, but maybe they're feeling it inside, so that, like opening up the ground and people can be able to discuss it. And also we can get to know what actually brings in this issue.
Yeah. That's really hard. So maybe and I don't have the answers to that because the reason why is because people feel that they have nothing to hide. And for those of you who are listening, I'm using the scare quotes there. People feel that way because it seems so inevitable that their data is going to get into the hands of just about everyone else. Using digital technologies such as a phone or going on Facebook or using Twitter or whatever definitely does imply that those companies are going to take your data. They're going to do whatever they want. It's usually to monetize it, to make predictions, to give themselves more value.
It's their business model.
Exactly. And so it's really, really hard to to do anything to thwart it. You can live off the grid and create spaces where you can keep your data private, right? That you really care about, but then also realize that if you want to be part of, social discourse to a certain extent, there's a lot of data that you do give up. And in which case, I think the best way to address that is to once again frame it upfront and acknowledge that that is the way things are and encourage people to be as angry about it as they need to be, because to a certain extent, there is nothing that we can do about that without like broad sweeping political and economic change. And that's slow to come. And it's also not up to us, right? Because that's not our job. And so it's okay for us to be as angry about that as possible and to use that in order to look at, look at like what you have in terms of data and think about like, all right, so right now I don't like it, but I'm going to have to give that data up and look at other parts of other bits of data that we have and say, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect that. And so going from like, this vague, like everything is out there, I have no power, and drilling down into, the buckets of data where I have no power at this point and where I do have more power, and focusing on where I can exert my power gives people a little bit more focus, helps or encourages them to find the appropriate tooling to protect it. And once again, clears that headspace.
I like that. Harlo, you're the one who came up with this idea for the proposal we were writing for RightsCon. Where were you coming from when you? Because I will not lie, that's the first time I heard of it, and I was like, And I'm like, oh, this is something I see every day. Like,
Yeah.
where were you coming from when you came up with this idea of digital security nihilism?
Um, it's definitely something that has been in the back of my head for a while. And also, huge kudos to Wukash Kroll from Internews, who helped me like kind of put that into the best framing for these series of conversations that we've been having. Because this is something that trainers have been grappling with for a while, and it's something that I've experienced all over the globe in different ways, in different formats, whether it's in person or over a Zoom call or whatever. In large rooms or in consultations one-on-one with journalists who find themselves in danger, like right in the moment. And yeah, it's just very fascinating and something like it's a problem that I find myself up against again and again and again. And for me, I wanted to open up a space where we can discuss how we see it from our weird corner of internet freedom as trainers, and share tactics for how we all combat it from our own individual points of view. I would love to see it go further.
Yeah, me too. I mean, well, we've begun the conversation.
Yeah.
So the starting point is the hardest. So thank you so much, Harlo. Do you have anything to add, like something maybe we left out? Oh, Mary Poppins, please give that example, because for me, I'm trying to remember what I said, but I can't.
Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mary Poppins, for those of you who haven't seen that movie, is about a nanny who drops into a home to nanny some children with an umbrella, like falls from the sky holding an umbrella as a parachute, solves everyone's problems, and then at the end she's like cheerio, and she leaves.
Yeah.
And so in training spaces, that has been used as a pejorative term for a trainer who does exactly that, falls in from the sky, from outside, attempts to solve everyone's problems and leaves. And why that extends into our space is because what happens after Mary Poppins left? I mean, I don't know. Was there a sequel? I think there was, but I never saw it or whatever. It's not canon. But ultimately, like, no one ever thinks about what is left behind. So you have okay, like all of these tools that may be applicable, but am I going to use them? Mary Poppins didn't check to see if people actually did the work that she told them they should do. Yeah, does the group that you drop into have the capacity even to bring themselves to the finish line? And also, there's no finish line. It's always something more to do.
Yeah.
But the capacity to actually address these things, or did you just leave them with really great information, but with no resources to actually fulfill that in a way that makes sense for the people who are there? And so, yeah, that is something that I know so many trainers want to address, and also think about the way that the engagements are structured and funded and, decided upon, given the fact that you can do an excellent training, but if an organization doesn't have the capacity to continue that work, if you didn't focus on capacity building in tandem with a training, you might not be doing as much good as you set out to do.
Now that, well, I know I said it's the end. This is the end. Brings up to the other question of follow-up trainings, because now you've left people with this information, and maybe there's no funding for a follow-up training. What is some of the nuggets that we can give our participants on the issue of now, maintaining what we've taught them and also keeping themselves updated on what is happening?
So first and foremost, the very simplest thing is subscribe to our newsletter. If you go to freedom.press/training, you will find all of the information required to read up on our guides, which we publish very frequently, and subscribe to our newsletter, which is a fun digest weekly about digital security trends that we find interesting. And this is good for any of you listening, but also great recommendations for that person in the training who really does, once again, get really enthusiastic about what they've learned, is able to internalize it, and is excited about promoting a culture of security within their organization after you've left. It's always excellent to pinpoint who those people are within that room, because they're going to be the people who are the best situated to make sure that that capacity is built after a trainer has left. In terms of follow-up, though, definitely it would be great to have follow-up trainings. However, as you mentioned, that's not always feasible because of
the
funding and things like that. So one thing that I would recommend trainers do, we are currently experimenting with this in our engagements, is to focus on these conversations at the beginning when you're having that first phone call with an organization and they're like, so we want a training, these are the dates that we're thinking about, these are the topics that we need to address. A question that you would want to ask in addition is, so do you have within your budget capacity the capacity to invest in infrastructure afterwards? And you might even address, if you're putting together a quote for for services, you might even want to take that into account. So if an organization says, we have $3,000 to get all of this done as part of our employee, digital security training series, you can say, all right, so if you have $3,000, we want you to think about earmarking one of those $3,000 or half of those $3,000 to what goes on after the training. And in which case you can augment the training that you're doing with what we like to call implementation conversations, where we set the IT manager aside, we set perhaps that digital security champion that we've identified aside, and we say, so these are some steps that you can do afterwards to make sure that this doesn't, just fall out of people's heads and just plop on the ground. And so I think that is a way to, at least with working within a limited budget, to give people more of an opportunity to succeed at these types of projects.
Well, I don't think I have anything to add. What is your parting shots?
My what?
Your parting shots. Do you have anything that you feel like you've not said and you want to, you're a Yankee, so.
Yeah, I'm a Yankee. Don't trust Yankees, for real. No, no, we're trying our best, just getting up every day and doing the work.
Yeah.
No parting shots really, but yeah, once again, freedom.press/training. Hit us up. We are going to be in the new year implementing office hours. And this is an opportunity for anyone to, put maybe 15, 20 minutes in our calendars on specific days in order to talk about just very quickly, I have a particular problem. What do you think about this approach? And while in, the past, what we would have said is do you have a digital security question? Do you think your phone has malware? Blah, blah, blah. Come to office hours and we'll talk you through it. That is always applicable. And there are definitely members of our team who are incredibly great at talking people through that. However, I think that I would like to encourage people in the new year to use those office hours to have conversations like this. How do I address capacity building within my organization, given the resources that we have? How do I put together a training series? Because ultimately, if you are, the head of IT at an organization, it's going to be your responsibility to address that for your people. How do I put that together in a way that makes sense and maximizes our budget? So if anybody has broader, big picture conversations about security within organizational context, I'm your guy.
Oh, thank you so much, Harlo. Thank you so much. Tell our friends, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, that they will be hearing from us. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for having me and for working with me on this really cool bit of research that we've been doing.
No, I mean, it's something that I was like, wow, I really want to be part of this. So thanks to you. So there you have it, people. We were having talking to Harlo from the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Make sure you check out their social media pages and also subscribe to their newsletters, which I've not, which I'm going to do after this. So yeah, see you in the next episode. In case you have any question, you know what to do.
Yay.
See ya.
Bye.